They are very good fighters. They are sons of legends. They are incredibly charismatic. They're polar opposites. Yeah, I think Eubank will probably start a favourite because he's the bigger guy. He's potentially he's more skillful. He's certainly got maybe a slightly harder style to read.
I plan on sleeping Eubank inside 4 rounds, definitely. And yeah, of course, yeah, it's headshots only. Headshots only.
Adam Smith predicts Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Legendary broadcaster and the voice of boxing, Adam Smith has given his thoughts on the heavily anticipated matchup between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. Commenting on the interest surrounding the Conor Benn versus Eubank Jr. fight, Adam Smith believes that there must be more events that appeal to casual fans as it brings more interest to the sport. He comments that while fights like Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol are excellent viewing experiences for hardcore boxing enthusiasts, they do not appeal to the broader sports audience.
Mine's pretty simple. I think casual fans need to get involved in the sport still. I think it's the Bivol Beterbiev sort of type of fights, which are fantastic, are always going to be loved by fight fans.
Adam believes that there are some big-name fighters and rivalries that transcend the sport of boxing and will have a greater mainstream appeal if they were to fight each other. Smith claims that Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank is a fight that has a similar aura to the Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua rivalry, as the fandom is more familiar with their story and history.
But I think the casual fans, and there's probably 4 or 5 names that casual fans just know now. Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, obviously, and that fight, I think, still needs to happen. And Conor Benn and Chris Eubank, or Chris Eubank and Conor Benn, it doesn't really matter. Eubank and Benn are names that they're familiar with. They obviously know the story of what happened.
Conor Benn's boxing promoter Eddie Hearn analyzes the heated rivalry between Conor Benn and Eubank Jr., commenting that similarly to the fathers' rivalry, both Benn and Eubank have genuine detest for each other.
You know, it's just going to be the build-up. You boys are going to be sitting there. Parsons is going to be having wet dreams at the numbers. You know, just looking at the interest in this fight, the narrative in the fight, the history, the legacy, the beef.
Hearn was vocal about the magnitude of their rivalry, as recalled the appeal and ticket scales for the first time it was announced to be fought in the O2 Arena. Eddie adds that this time around the fight will be bigger and grander than last time, considering it was being fought in a bigger venue, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
It's got absolutely everything. We saw the first time we made this fight, it was the fastest selling fight ever at the O2. It was the biggest grossing fight ever at the O2. Now it'll be in a stadium, and it'll be 3 times as big.
Hearn believes that the Benn versus Eubank Jr. fight is going to be one of the biggest matchups in the history of British boxing. Following Conor Benn's return to boxing after a suspension of 2.5 years, Eddie expresses his excitement about Benn finally getting a new boxing license. Hearn believes that Benn was enthusiastic to accept the huge fight offer against Eubank, as he recalled the frustration and hard work both he and Conor had to go through during the suspension period. Eddie is pleased with Turki Alal Sheikh's involvement in making the negotiations happen between the two camps, and agreement toward favorable conditions for Benn.
Boxing's in such a great place, and early hours of the morning, of course, you saw His Excellency announce the big one, Ben Eubank, and I couldn't be happier. You know, 2 years of graft, 2 years of pain, if you like, particularly for Conor, but for me as well. And I never stopped grafting, I never stopped grinding away. And we ended up with just an amazing opportunity for Conor Benn. Absolutely everything we wanted in the deal and more. Everyone done an amazing job, and now you've got the biggest fight in Britain.
Adam Smith reveals that he was not a big fan of the Conor Benn versus Eubank Jr. fight during the first instance of their rivalry. He claims that his hesitance in the match didn't come from the controversy surrounding Benn and his PED use, but from the fact that there was such a significant weight difference between the two fighters. Adam adds that this is not the case now, as Benn is much larger than he was previously, making the fight a more suitable proposition. Smith believes that the heated exchange between the two and the story attached to their rivalry means that this fight will capture all the headlines in the lead up to the event.
I actually didn't like it much last time as a fight with the before all the difficulties and it was called off. But when I thought about the weights and everything, I was a little bit uncomfortable with it. But time has moved on. I think Conor is naturally bigger than he was anyway. And I think that it is an acid fight and story and rivalry that is going to light up the back pages.
Adam Smith analyzes the rivalry between Conor Benn and Eubank Jr., explaining the similarity between them and their fathers, suggesting that both Ben and Chris are complete opposites of each other. Smith explains that both fighters have a unique way of expressing themselves, and says that he is intrigued to find out how the fight will turn out. Smith believes that Eubank's strategy in the ring will be to use his range of skills to overwhelm his opponent, while Conor will count on his tenaciousness to get him across the line.
They're both very good communicators, by the way, in their different ways. And there's a hatred, there's pride. You know Ben's going to be vicious. You know Eubank is going to try and utilize his skills. Fascinating to see how Eubank really makes the weight and how strong he is. Fascinating to see whether Ben is as strong on the night. He's got to take the fight to Eubank.
The fight between Ben and Eubank was made official when Turki Alalshik broke the news by announcing the fight on his Twitter. Turki revealed that the clash between the two will take place as the main event of the Fatal Fury City of Wolves card in London in April 2025. He wrote on his Twitter, "Eubank Jr. versus Ben is done. It will be in April in London. Soon I will announce the day and the location." The venue and date for the fight were later revealed by Turki on the Ring Magazine official Twitter account, which said, "The Ring Magazine is excited to announce its first boxing card by the name Fatal Fury, City of the Wolves, which will take place at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London, April 26. Like Eddie Hearn, Conor Benn expresses his excitement to return to the ring after an extended 2.5-year suspension from boxing. Benn took to his Instagram Live to mention his anticipation to finally put on a spectacle for his British audience and deliver a memorable performance against Eubank.
I'm very excited, very, very excited, to be honest. You know, I've missed fighting back home, miss the British fans, miss the supporters. But yeah, just thought I'd come on and just say I appreciate all the love and support, you know, over the past 2.5 years. I'm excited to come out and, yeah, give you guys the fight you want.
The Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn fight is only 3 months away, and Ben has taken no time in revealing his intentions for the matchup. Conor has made a bold prediction that he would make light work of Eubank by knocking him out by the end of the 4th round.
I go in there and punch holes in him. That's how I'll be. And that is by knocking Eubank out and rendering him unconscious in 4 rounds. No doubt.
Ben reveals that his suspension from boxing has not dulled his fighting ability and claims that he will be in his element despite jumping up 2 divisions to take on the fight against Chris Eubank. Conor bashes Eubank and his team for underestimating him and suggests that Chris may have thought that he is an easier matchup because of his welterweight status. Ben mentions the rehydration clause in the contract of his fight with Eubank Jr., suggesting that it is the same clause used in the IBF World title fights, so Eubank will have to follow them.
They're banking on me having to jump up 2 weight divisions. You know, all I keep seeing is sob stories about how Eubank's got to stick to the rehydration clause, which is championship rehydration clause. So, you know, that's what they do for the IBF World title. So I don't hear anyone getting a violin about me having to jump up 2 weights. So, yeah, as I said, it's Team Ben versus everybody.
But discussing the outcome of the fight, Adam edges the scale in Eubank's favor as he feels Chris will make use of his size and skills to overwhelm Conor. Smith acknowledges that Ben is much younger and believes that climbing up the division gives Conor a greater advantage as he will have more energy than if had to cut down weight.
Yeah, I think Eubank will probably start a favourite because he's the bigger guy. He's, well, potentially he's more skillful. He's certainly got maybe a slightly harder style to read. However, Conor's got youth on his side. He, I think, will be pretty comfortable at the weight because he's coming up. And I like that in a fighter rather than dragging yourself down. So I think that's going to be a big factor in this fight.
Adam acknowledges that the fight can go either way, but believes that Ben's tenacity might give him the edge against Eubank. Smith points out that Liam Smith was able to take down Chris and backs Conor to have just as much ability to do the same to Eubank.
And I think if Conor doesn't get hurt in the early rounds, and I think he wants this so much, and I think the vicious intent of Conor Benn could be a real problem for Eubank Jr. Look, it's a very interesting fight. I don't think it's an easy one to pick. But, you know, Liam Smith stopped Eubank. And if he can, then there's no reason Conor Benn can't put the heat on Eubank. He already says he's going to knock him out.
Smith believes that if both fighters are at the peak of their powers, come fight night, it is going to be a very difficult fight to predict. Adam says that he edged the fight in Eubank's favor 2 years ago, but now he backs the younger Conor to be the favorite in the fight.
But then Eubank looked really good against Smith. If Eubank's at his very best, it's a hard night for Conor Benn. But if Conor Benn's at his very best, it's a hard night for Chris Eubank. So it's one of those that I think, I don't know if I might be slightly leaning towards the younger man, slightly, and maybe last time I was leaning more towards Eubank. But it's, yeah, the scales are there, aren't they? I think it's too difficult a fight to predict.
The fight between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. is set to be fought at 170 pounds in a middleweight clash in April. Reports suggest that both Conor and Eubank have agreed on a rehydration clause after the weigh-ins for the fight, which can suggest that Eubank will enter the fight a lot bigger than Benn and have a significant advantage over him. Chris Eubank has gone to Twitter to rant about this rehydration clause on his Twitter, expressing his disappointment with this agreement. He wrote, "Just so you all know, these two rats, Conor Nigel and Eddie Hearn, are now trying to enforce a rehydration restriction on me to make the fight. They talk a big game, but when it actually comes down to it, just a pair of cowards." American sports writer Dan Raphael revealed his thoughts on the Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank fight announcement. Dan suggested that he was not a fan of a rehydration clause in any boxing match, claiming that fighters should be willing to show up to the eventual bout in the same weight as the weigh-ins. He believes that despite that, the clause is well within the terms of the boxing governing bodies, making it a reasonable request to be added by Benn.
Not really. I mean, look, I understand why Eubank wouldn't want to do a rehydration clause, and frankly, I hate rehydration clauses. If you're going to fight a guy, weigh in at the weigh-in, make the limit that you all contracted for, and whatever happens after that, so be it.
Raphael acknowledges Eubank's frustration, claiming that despite fighting in the middleweight division at 160 lbs his entire career, Chris is not a huge opponent to face.
So I've never been a big fan of the rehydration clause, but if that was what it took to make the fight, a guy like Chris Eubank, who has been fighting in the middleweight division for the last few years, obviously he's got plenty of experience fighting in the super middleweight division also. But I don't think, you look at Chris Eubank and see this guy who's a big super middleweight like.
Eddie Hearn commented on Eubank's stance on the rehydration clause in his fight against Conor Benn. Hearn claims that Chris should have no problem with this request, seeing that Benn was willing to jump up 2 divisions to take the fight against Eubank. Eddie adds that Benn's normal fighting weight is in the welterweight division, while Eubank competes at middleweight, which gives Chris a huge size advantage over Conor. Hearn believes that he is pleased with the favorable negotiation terms, suggesting that the request for a rehydration clause is well within their rights and is in accordance with the Boxing Commission rules.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much. I'll tell you something now, that the weight is at 160, which is Chris Eubank's weight, and the hydration is well within governing bodies. It's a much better hydration for him this time than it was last time. And by the way, when people say, "Oh, you made him," Conor's coming up 2 weight classes. Conor's a welterweight. He's coming up to fight a middleweight. And nothing is unreasonable within the contract. And as I said, we've had it off. We've got the greatest deal ever.
The fight between Conor Benn and Chris Eubank was originally set to be fought in October 2022 in the O2. The stage was set 30 years after the iconic rivalry between their fathers Nigel Benn and Cry Eubank Sr. Unfortunately, the fight had to be cancelled after Benn was declared to be using performance enhancement drugs. After the 2 failed drug tests, Conor was stripped of his boxing license but has since returned to boxing after 2.5 years and is finally set to face off against Eubank in April. Adam mentions the 22nd February fight card of Riyadh season, commenting that while the card is stacked with big fights, it doesn't appeal to the casual boxing fan base. He believes that even though the card features the likes of Daniel Dubois and Gilles Zhang, broader sports fans may not be as familiar with them as they are with the likes of Conor Benn and Chris Eubank.
And you look at February the 22nd, it's the best card that's ever been put on. It's an absolute monster. It's an absolute firecracker for fight fans. But when I tell my sporting fans I'm looking forward to a big night in a few weeks, they're like, is that Dubois? That's the guy that beat, and who's Zhang, and who, they don't really know yet. I think the fight fans obviously do.
Boxing promoter Frank Warren has commented on the appeal of the Conor Benn versus Eubank Jr. fight after the extended hiatus of Benn from boxing. Frank believes that this rivalry still retains its charm among boxing enthusiasts.
Well, it's a fight that everybody's had a lot of interest in for various reasons. Originally, it was going on in O2, was it? I can't remember where
Yeah, it was the O2.
before it got postponed for well publicised reasons. Been a lot of controversy the last 2 years. Obviously, their fathers are very, very famous British boxers, and by the way, happy birthday to Nigel Benn today, 61 today.
Frank believes that the boxing faithful will still tune into this fight, despite the controversy surrounding Benn and his PED use in the previous fight.
I think it's people will buy into it and they'll watch it, and it's got a lot of controversy around it.
Warren had been very critical of Conor Benn after his failed drug results and was not pleased with Benn and his team's behavior in the previous bout. After Benn's return and his issuance of a new boxing license, Frank seemed to retract his statements and claims that he was not educated enough on the matter to discuss Conor's case. Warren believes that once the anti-doping agency has given Benn the green light, there should be no questions regarding his eligibility to compete again.
It must be cleared to box because they've said so. They're the ones who issue the right. Border Control issue the licenses, and you can decide whether somebody's innocent or not of what they're doing of drug abuse. And if he's cleared, he's cleared.
Frank comments that Conor Benn has rehabilitated his career after the failed drug results and has gotten himself back to a position to compete again. He adds that as promoters, they have no right to question the legitimacy of everything, and the legal matters should be left to the hands of the regulatory authority in the build-up to the fight.
That's not our job as promoters to police the sport. You know, I support what they say, but if somebody goes to prison for an offence, the idea is you go to prison, you serve your sentence, rehabilitate yourself, and you wipe the slate clean.
British professional boxer Liam Smith backed his former opponent Eubank Jr. to take the win against Conor Benn on points. Liam acknowledged the competitive nature of the fight and added that he would not be shocked if the result turned out be the exact opposite, with Conor Benn emerging victorious.
You know what, I'm a little bit torn at the moment, but I'll stick with what I've always said. I think Eubank beats him on points, but I won't be surprised if Conor wins.
Liam pointed out that Eubank Jr.'s career was slowly coming to an end, and it was the perfect opportunity for him to have his much-anticipated fight against Conor Benn. Liam recalls Eubank's concerns about fighting at 160 pounds and claims that Chris is too old to be fighting in the middleweight division. He believes that Eubank's decline might give Benn the edge to the edge in their fight.
Yeah, for many reasons. I think Eubank is firmly on the slide, and I know I get stick for saying that. I also think 160 is hurting him now. He's starting to mention it a few times, so that's why I bring Conor into it a little bit more.
Smith adds that both fighters possess the ability to knock each other out and suggests that he would not be surprised by either fighter putting the other to sleep. Liam claims that Conor has a history of getting knocked out by lesser-known opponents and believes that Eubank is certainly more powerful than them to get the same result.
But like I said before, that being said, if Conor flattens Chris, I won't be surprised. I won't be like, wow, Conor's just knocked Chris out. And if Chris was the same to Conor, I won't be surprised, because Conor's been down, many times before off journeyman, lesser punches than Chris, so I won't be surprised with the outcome, but I do think it's a closer fight this time round.
In the build-up to the fight, Conor Benn has given a timeline on his plans after his fight against Eubank Jr. Benn confirms that he does not wish to fight at 160 lbs for long and has targeted Liam Smith as his next opponent at 154 pounds before eventually taking on Mario Barrios for the world title at 147 pounds.
And then I'll drop back down to 147. But I see Liam Smith talking, so once I'm done with Eubank, I'll go back down to 154, happily, knock Smith out at 154 and then drop back down to 147 and capture the world title. For me, it's 160 for Eubank and that's it. I'm jumping up 2 weight divisions to fight this man, and I'm dropping back down to 147 to capture that world title when fighting Barrios.
That was all for today. April is just around the corner and things have been heating up between Conor Benn and Eubank Jr. What do you feel about the matchup? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay notified when we post a new video.